Welcome back, Trailblazers. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to take a moment to talk about a tool that has completely transformed the way I plan and navigate my hikes, AllTrails Plus. As a Trailheads Ambassador and the organizer of the Yakima Valley Trekkers, I'm out on the trails a lot. One of my favorite features of AllTrails Plus is the ability to edit and create my own maps. Conditions change, fallen trees, washed out sections, or even a last-minute reroute. And with AllTrails Plus, I can adjust my route on the fly and share it with others so everyone stays informed and safe. AllTrails Plus also gives you offline maps, wrong turn alerts, and 3D trail previews to help you stay on track and make the most of your adventure. And the best part, you can get 30% off an AllTrails Plus membership with my exclusive link in the episode show notes. So whether you're planning your next big trek or just looking for a new trail to explore, AllTrails Plus has you covered. Check it out and let's hit the trail. Welcome everyone to the Hikes and Mikes podcast. I'm your host Ivan, and together we'll embark on a weekly journey, connecting with extraordinary hikers from all corners of the United States and beyond. Throughout these winter months, we've had the privilege of conversing with remarkable individuals. Their experiences and adventures will leave you yearning to hit the trails. What happens when you quit your job, pack up your 2008 Prius, and set off on a mission to visit every national park in the lower 48, all in a single year? Patrick Smith did just that, clocking 45,000 miles on the road and collecting unforgettable adventures along the way. In this episode of Hikes and Mikes, Patrick shares his inspiring solo road trip, the challenges of car camping, his favorite and least favorite national parks, and the surprising hidden gems he discovered across the country. We dive into his wildest hikes, favorite meals, unexpected breakdowns, and what's next on his travel bucket list. Without further ado, let's jump into this episode with our guest, Patrick. Welcome, everyone, to the latest episode of the Hikes and Mikes podcast. I have a really amazing guest with me today. His name is Patrick, and he's going to be sharing about his incredible journey across the United States. Patrick, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We always like to start off by asking our guests to share a little bit about themselves and how they got started hiking.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ivan. I really appreciate you having me on the podcast. Hello, everybody. My name is Patrick Smith. I'm a 28-year-old from Chicagoland. I'm a chemical engineer, grew up in Indiana and then moved to Chicago after I graduated. I've been in Chicagoland around 5 to 6 years or so. Back in March of 2024, I was very unhappy with my job and the direction of my career. So I really wanted to make a change. I've always wanted to travel and see all the national parks, but due to finances and life, I've just never had an opportunity to really travel. So back in March, I said, I'm going to go. So I quit my job and then I made it my mission to try to go to all of the 51 national parks in the lower 48 in a single year or single season. And fortunately, I was able to do that. I started out in March and then it took me around 8 months or so, but I was able to complete my journey. So it only took about 45,000 miles on my Prius, but I was able to successfully journey around the country and go to all the national parks, at least in the lower 48. So it was a really incredible journey and definitely a journey that I won't forget.
Yeah, I've been kind of following your post on Reddit, and for our listeners, I was able to learn about Patrick's experience on Reddit rather than Instagram. And we'll put a link in the episode show notes so people can see some of the posts, because you've been sharing different pictures and different experiences throughout different subreddits. And it's been really great to see some of the highlights of that trip. Now, before we kind of jump into that, Patrick, how would you describe the local hiking scene in and around Indiana and Chicagoland?
I love living around Chicago. I think it's one of the best cities in the country. My only critique is that the hiking scene is very poor. We have a few little state parks here and there. Starved Rock is a big one. It's about an hour outside of Chicagoland. But really, there just isn't much hiking at all outside of small nature preserves. And I think that was one of the biggest drivers for me of wanting to go on this journey, to really experience the magnitude and the beauty of the true national parks around the country, and especially out west, just because of how poor the hiking scene is in and around around the Midwest and Illinois and Indiana.
And when it came to preparing for this trip, what inspired you to visit all 51 national parks? And was there any other destinations that you kind of had toyed around with making it a point during this trip to be sure that you visit or you see?
You know, it was really interesting. When I first started, I was planning on only doing a month. So the original inspiration or idea for this trip was back in March, I had a wedding down in Houston that I had to go to. And I'd never been to Texas before. So I really wanted to explore more of the state, go to Austin, San Antonio, Big Bend. And so I was trying to plan this in my mind. And I thought, okay, maybe I can fly down to Houston and then rent a car and drive and visit all these places and turn it into a little bit more of an extended trip. But then I realized from Austin and San Antonio, Big Bend National Park isn't too far away. And then I was looking at a map and I thought to myself, well, from Big Bend National Park, Guadalupe Mountains and Carlsbad Caverns National Parks, they're pretty close relatively to Big Bend. And then I sort of from there developed this plan of, what if I just went on this big route or big road trip throughout the American Southwest and tried to hit as many national parks as I reasonably could. And so that was what sort of gave me the inspiration behind wanting to go on this trip. And initially, I was just going to spend a month in the Southwest. I was going to go to all the national parks in the Four Corners area, and then I was going to come back to Chicago, rejoin the real world, so to speak, and find a job, find another job, and so on and so forth. But I just enjoyed the journey so much that I decided to keep going. So then, April rolled into May, rolled into June, rolled into July. And then before I know it, I had traveled to all the lower 48 states and had traveled to all the national parks in the lower 48. So it was really just a matter of, wanting to continue on. And it sort of expanded from just, a single month trip to an 8-month journey across the United States.
So the trip down in Texas is what really kind of kicked off this journey into motion, right?
Yeah, exactly that. It was originally just, I wanted to experience the barbecue and the entirety of the state of Texas. And then from there, it just evolved into this incredible journey across the United States.
And the one thing that you did is, I think a lot of people think of like van lifers that go across the country and explore and visit national parks, but you did it with your car that you had in hand, and that was your Prius. How was your car set up, and did you have to do any adjustments or retrofit or build out anything for your car setup to be on the road for so long?
Yeah, I've been describing it to my friends. I mean, this is really a poor man's van life that I have set up for myself here. Really, it's just a stock Prius, 2008. I had about 162,000 miles on it when I first started. And then by the end of the journey, I put on, or the mileage was about 210. So I put on a roughly 45,000 miles or so. But yeah, it's just pretty much a stock Prius, no major changes. I put a fresh set of tires on before I started my journey, and they fortunately lasted me the entire length of my trip, which was really nice. But it's really a pretty simple setup. All I have is I've got the back seats folded down and just have like a little mattress pad laid out that I would sleep on. I have a little like ice chest or cooler that I would store food in that I would use to kind of refrigerate my meals. I have a little hot plate that I plug into my car charger so that way I can warm up food. That was one of the things that was really drawing me back to the real world. If I could figure out a means of being able to actually cook food, that was one of the things I was really missing on the road, because really all I could do with a hot plate is just sort of warm up meals. So I would have to utilize like pre-cooked rice and Walmart rotisserie chicken and basically just warm that up as my meal. I couldn't really cook. I was a little hesitant because I was living in my car about using like a propane canister or anything like that, because I was worried I would come out from a hike one day and then my car would just be a flaming carcass at the trailhead. Basically just a hot plate, a cooler, lay down the back seats, and from there I went. As far as like, bathing and stuff, I would just use a Planet Fitness. For $15, you could, shower and do all that anywhere across the country. Meals would just be things that I could warm up. But apart from that, yeah, it's a relatively simple setup.
And you mentioned that you did invest in new tires before the trip and they lasted the entirety of the journey. How did your car hold up putting that many miles and being on the road for so long?
I tell you what, I've become a huge fan of Toyota thanks to this experience. I only broke down twice, which for a car of this age and for how much abuse I was putting it through, I thought was pretty good. I broke down in Fresno, California. The first time it was I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, my inverter coolant pump that failed, which had to get replaced. And then later on, towards the end of my journey, when I was in Baltimore, my combination meter, which controls like the dash display, went out. So I had to get that replaced. Fortunately, both times that my car needed maintenance work, the car was still operational. So I could still drive it around, but it just had to be taken into the shop to get repaired. But overall, this Prius was a total trooper. I will say the engine sounds horrific whenever it turns on. It's just super loud and obnoxious, but it just keeps running no matter what. So it's been an incredible workhorse for me.
Oh man, that's incredible. And are you still daily driving it right now?
Yep, absolutely. This is my daily driver. I'm actually in the Prius right now. So, but yeah, it's still cruising along. I haven't had any other issues with it, which has been really amazing.
I'm curious, you mentioned how you were able to use Planet Fitness for showers and getting workouts in, but then you had the hot plate to be able to warm up food. How did you handle the logistics of finding places to park and sleep every night?
Yeah, it was always a little bit of a challenge trying to find the best place, a place where I wouldn't necessarily be harassed or would be safe. My go-to was always big department store parking lots. So your Walmarts, your Targets, Home Depot was a big one. For the most part, they are generally okay with people leaving their cars there overnight. Some places aren't so forgiving of that, or accepting of that, I should say. But for the most part, big department store parking lots were usually my go-to. And some locations, like in the mountains or, in national parks, obviously you don't have a Walmart in those kinds of areas. So I would simply look for other areas where I might be able to park my car. Lodges and hotel parking lots were a big one because, they can't really distinguish between whether you're a patron or not, especially if it's late at night. I would always try to find areas that I felt were safe or at least seemed safe. Some guesses were better than others. But for the most part, I was able to successfully find places to sleep. The only time I was ever harassed throughout the entirety of this journey was down in the Florida Keys. I did not realize until I went to the Keys, but apparently it's illegal to sleep in your car in the Florida Keys. I was parked at this, I guess, like shopping mall parking lot area, and I went to sleep around midnight or so. And then all of a sudden at 2 a.m., I hear knock, knock, knock on my window, Key West police. So I was like, oh my goodness, I pulled off my sunscreens or sunshades, whatever you want to call them. And so I talked with the police and they communicated to me that it's actually illegal to sleep in your car overnight. So I had to, hightail it out of there. And fortunately, they were very nice and they just, let me go and just told me to, find somewhere else to go. So I went, back out of the Keys and was able to find some place to sleep, closer to Miami. But yeah, that was the only time that I ever got harassed or anything while I was sleeping in my car overnight. So I was pretty fortunate and thankful for that.
I'm glad you're able to share that because that was going to be a follow-up question is if you ever got the knock. Because for those that are nomads, they always have, a story of getting the knock, whether it's at a Walmart or at a different shopping center. Did you notice whether there was a specific region that you were starting to notice that like Walmart weren't allowing overnight parking?
One of the things I found along like touristy beach towns, both in the Southeast and the West Coast, I would have more difficulty in like finding places to sleep or finding parking spots, especially for like the big department stores. They would have signs that, said no overnight parking allowed, what have you. So usually at night, I would sort of leave those beach towns and go further inland. And then from there, I was usually able to find a spot to sleep. But yeah, beach towns were very strict regarding parking, especially overnight parking, in a way that, other locations weren't.
And Patrick, you were able to share that you were able to get a hot plate in order to warm up food. After so many months on the road, so many miles, were there some favorite meals that you were able to create while you were on the trip, and maybe some that you will definitely be taking a break from before you start eating them again?
I wish I could say that I was very creative in my warm-up meals, but for the most part, my standard meal was rotisserie chicken, pre-cooked rice, and just beans out of a can. So I was usually able to put that together in a bowl, maybe add a little hot sauce or additional seasoning, and then warm that up. And that was my staple meal for the majority of my journey. There were times, like especially if I'd come back from a very rigorous hike and I, was feeling really accomplished, the thought of just celebrating with beans and rice was less than ideal. So I'd go out for like a celebratory like dinner, what have you. But for the most part, that was pretty much my staple meal. Eventually, one of the things that I really struggled with as far as food storage was water ingress. So I would just use, a basic cooler, fill it with ice and store my food in that. And I would have these little containers that have, gaskets on them that I would use to store the food. The issue was the gaskets on those containers aren't watertight. So when the ice would melt, then, all my food would just be essentially drowned or soaked in water. And so that made meals specifically less appetizing than that. So that was one of the challenges that I really had to work through. So because of that, I eventually switched over to canned chicken. So, the same way you can buy canned tuna, you can get canned chicken. And I would do that instead of rotisserie chicken just due to all the struggles that I had with water getting into my food. But for the most part, chicken, rice, and beans was my staple for the vast majority of my journey.
Each region has their own cuisine. They have some amazing local dishes. Was there a particular region where you ended up finding some of your more favorite meals that you would either go in and grab from a restaurant or sit down and eat?
The rumors about SoCal having amazing Mexican food are very much true. Some of the best food that I've ever had personally was just at little mom and pop shops or food trucks in Southern California. I remember I would use food subreddits whenever I was visiting a big city to try to figure out what were the good places to eat. I remember in LA, I had 5 different restaurants that I wanted to go to. And I spent one of my days of traveling just going to all those different restaurants. That was the single best day of food that I've ever personally experienced. So I would definitely say SoCal had, for me, the best food across the entirety of my journey. I will say probably the single best meal that I ever had was in Baltimore. I had a crab cake there. And usually crab cakes for me can be a little hit or miss, but this crab cake in particular really knocked my socks off. So that was probably the single best meal. But in terms of overall cuisine, I have to hand it to Southern California.
And do you remember, Patrick, the name of the restaurant where you got that crab cake?
Yes, the best crab cake that I ever had was at Angie Seafood in Baltimore. That was delicious, just west of Patterson Park.
I'll be sure to add that to my Google Maps next time I'm in Baltimore. Now, the part that I'm really interested in speaking with you, Patrick, is you were able to visit the 51 national parks in the lower 48, and you went from coast to coast. And I know it's hard to choose a favorite because each one is unique and beautiful in their own ways. But which national park did you find the most surprising and why?
In terms of surprising national park, I would say for myself, Dry Tortugas was the most surprising. For those that don't know, Dry Tortugas is about 70 miles or so west of Key West down in Florida. It's just basically a small island in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. And that was a national park that I had pretty low expectations for going in, but I was just amazed by just how beautiful it was. The snorkeling there was incredible. So much diversity of wildlife and fish that I was able to see. Being able to walk around this 19th century Civil War era fort was just so cool. Being able to explore that felt a little bit like Pirates of the Caribbean, so to speak. It was just such a fun and unique experience. And it was unlike any of the other national parks that I had been to, where they're in a more traditional national park, there are hiking trails and so on and so forth. Being at Dry Tortugas, basically just being alone on this island in the middle of the Caribbean, was just a really cool experience. So I really, in terms of, what surprised me or what I thought was just a really interesting, unique experience, I have to hand it to Dry Tortugas.
Yeah, that one's definitely on my list, but was it easy to gain access to the island, or did you have to plan it kind of weeks in advance?
Yeah, for Dry Tortugas, I definitely recommend doing some planning in advance. I got extremely lucky. So when I was down in the Keys, I was chatting with some folks in town and I mentioned that I wanted to go to Dry Tortugas. And they told me, dude, Dry Tortugas, because you have to take a ferry out there in order to access the island. So they told me, dude, Dry Tortugas has been sold out for weeks. You have to buy your ticket weeks in advance if you want to be able to get on the ferry. So I was like, oh, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I might have to look into chartering a seaplane to try to get out there. But fortunately, as I was doing some research, I found out that if you go to the Dry Tortugas ferry office early, you can sign up on their wait list. And it's a physical sheet of paper that one of the employees hands to you and you put your name on it. And if they have cancellations or if people don't show up, then you could be added and gain access to the ferry that's going out that day. So that's what I did. I woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning or so, went to the office at about 5. When I got there, there were already 3 people ahead of me. So we, all put our our names on the sheet of paper. And, a couple hours later, when they were announcing names, one of the employees came out and said, okay, I can accept the following 4 people: person number 1, person number 2, person number 3, and Patrick Smith. So I just barely was able to get on the island that day and was able to get on the ferry and go to Dry Tortugas. I would only recommend doing that if you are a solo person, just because it's a lot easier to, be able to sneak on there if you only have one person in your party. If you have a larger party, I would definitely recommend, trying to do, plan in advance and trying to get your tickets weeks ahead of time. So that way you don't have to try and hope that there are some cancellations and you can hop on the ferry. So I was very lucky that I was able to go that day. Otherwise, I probably would have been chartering a seaplane for an exorbitant amount of money.
Oh, that's awesome that you're able to get on that ferry. Because, I've heard that you have to make your reservations sometimes months in advance, especially during the busy season. But glad to know that if you catch yourself down in Florida and you might have a day or two off, there's still a chance that you could get on that ferry as on the wait list. Just make sure to arrive early, it sounds like.
Yeah, just make sure you're there at like 4 a.m. So that way you're first in line.
You were really kind enough to share a couple different lists that you had been able to put together about your experiences on this journey. And I think a lot of us that enjoy the national parks and public lands, we're always looking for those sleeper parks that might be flying under the radar. And you had a really great list of sleeper parks that you were able to share with me. Would you be able to kind of dive into some of the lesser known gems that you were able to find and explore?
Yeah, that's one of the, my favorite aspects about my journey and my travels is, in addition to going to the big name national parks that everyone knows, like Yellowstone and Yosemite, I was able to travel to a lot of lesser known national parks. And, there are some real gems out there that maybe people aren't as familiar with. Dry Tortugas was one of them that I really enjoyed. Another sleeper that I really enjoyed was Capitol Reef in Utah. Anyone who lives in Utah or is familiar with the Power 5 national parks is probably already familiar with Capitol Reef, but I had very little knowledge or understanding of Capitol Reef before my journey, and I was just blown away by it. To me, it was like a cheaper, quieter, less crowded Zion, if that makes sense. So it's a very similar, geology and very similar landscapes, but it's not nearly as well known. So it wasn't as popular or wasn't as crowded. So it was a lot more of an enjoyable experience in that regard. So I really enjoyed Capitol Reef. Another one that I loved is Great Basin National Park in Nevada. If you're anywhere around Vegas, I want to say it's maybe 2-3 hours drive north from Vegas. Great Basin is one of those national parks that has something for everyone. It has these stunning mountain ranges and Wheeler Peak that I was fortunate enough to be able to summit during my journey. So, beautiful mountain vistas. It also has a really extensive cave system. So, the cave tours are really interesting. I'm not a huge cave guy, but it was nice being able to kind of have that variety. One of the things that I really appreciated about Great Basin is, in a lot of national parks, the area around the national park is really built up. The small towns are, very touristy, and there's just a lot of hotels and people in those areas. Whereas Great Basin is very much in the middle of nowhere. The nearest town is a town called Baker that has maybe 300-400 people in it and just has like a couple small restaurants. So it's a very remote national park. It's a great way to sort of go to a national park while still escaping the crowds. And the landscapes were just beautiful, just gorgeous and stunning. So Great Basin is another one that I really recommend.
And Patrick, I did notice that you made it up to Washington and you were able to knock out our 3 national parks here. But one place that also caught my attention is you were able to do the enchantments. And I kind of wanted to ask you, did you end up doing the whole traverse? Or what was your experience like visiting the enchantments?
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to be able to do the whole traverse. I did it in a single day, which I would not recommend to anyone who's doing it. So I had a little bit of logistical challenges with the enchantments. So because I was just a solo person, they have this shuttle system where, you park your car at one of the trailheads, and then they pick you up and they drive you to the other trailhead. Then you hike the traverse and meet back up with your car. If you're a solo hiker, it's a great way to kind of deal with getting back to your car at the end of the hike. So I parked at one of the trailheads that I was going to be picked up from for the shuttle, and I set my alarm, went to sleep, and then the next day I woke up of my own fruition, which, for anyone else who's ever slept through an alarm clock, when you wake up by yourself, it's very startling because you realize, oh crap, I just slept through my alarm. So I missed my shuttle pickup. So I frantically called the office to try to see, hey, is there going to be another shuttle pickup? Can I still do it today? And fortunately, they had a cancellation on the next shuttle that was set to pick up people. So I was able to get to the next shuttle. The unfortunate aspect of that is because I missed the first shuttle, I was now like 2-3 hours behind schedule when I started my hike. So by the time I was maybe 75% of the way through the hike, it was already pitch black, dark out. Nightfall had come. So unfortunately, I spent the next 2-3 hours just in the dark trying to hike back to my vehicle. So I would certainly not recommend doing that. I definitely think the traverse, if you want to do the full traverse, you really need to camp and experience it. Trying to do the entire traverse in a single day, I really felt very rushed the whole time. I couldn't just sit there and experience the scenery and enjoy the surroundings. I really had to go throughout the entire hike, which made it a pretty exhausting experience. So I would definitely recommend for any person who wants to do the full traverse, try to camp if you can, try to get one of the camping permits. If you can't camp, then at least try to get on the hike early and don't sleep through your alarm like I did.
That traverse, it's something else. I know because of the lottery system, a lot of people choose to do the traverse because they weren't able to get a permit to camp there. But props to you for making it and doing it. I know that last 3 to 4 miles is just a slog of a trek to your car, but glad you were able to visit them and explore them. And that kind of brings me up to a follow-up question. Like outside of the national parks, you were able to visit different locations and do different experiences outside of the national park system. Are there any specific locations or experiences that stand out from across your journey?
Yeah, I have a few non-national park experiences that I really enjoyed. The first one that comes to mind is, I'm probably going to butcher this, but Bigelow Preserve in Western Maine. When I was going up to the Northeast, I had a list of, through my internet research, a list of hikes that I wanted to do. And I had sort of, just to kind of round out the list, I had written down Bigelow Preserve. And it was one of the hikes that I was actually considering cutting and not doing. But sort of at the last second, I thought, you know what, I'm just going to go ahead and do this hike and just knock it out, thinking that it really wouldn't be that great, but it far exceeded my expectations. It's probably my favorite hike that I did in the Northeast. I was very fortunate. I did it in early October, so the fall foliage was at its sort of peak color, and it was just a beautiful, stunning landscape. I would definitely recommend that for anyone who's in the Northeast and wants to, do that kind of hiking. That was probably my favorite out there. I also had the opportunity to do or go to a lot of state parks. The one that comes to mind is Valley of Fire State Park, just about 45 minutes east of Vegas. In my opinion, Valley of Fire rivals some of the best national parks that I've been to. The desert landscapes are just, really gorgeous. A lot of cool wildlife that I was able to see. It's really unlike any other place that I had been on my journey. So I would definitely recommend Valley of Fire. Another state park that I really liked was Antelope Island State Park, just west of Salt Lake City in Utah. That was really stunning. I did that in August, so it was a little miserable because of how hot it was, but the landscapes were really, really gorgeous. So I would definitely recommend that one as well. And then the other experience that sort of comes to mind is the Antelope Canyon in Arizona. I had never been in a slot canyon type environment before, but being able to experience that was really cool. The geology is just really interesting, and it's very otherworldly when you're down in the slot canyon. It is a little expensive because you have to go with a Navajo guide. So it cost around $100 when I did it, but I thought it was well worth the money, and I would definitely do it again for sure.
And I wanted to ask, Patrick, when you do visit these parks, whether they're national parks or outside of the national park system, how do you kind of approach selecting the hikes that you're going to do? Do you do some research beforehand, or do you use an app to kind of help you see what's available?
I will definitely say throughout this journey, AllTrails was my Bible, certainly. So I would use AllTrails almost exclusively to kind of decide which hikes I wanted to do and do research about, if I needed any sort of special equipment to complete the hike, so on and so forth. I would do a little bit of Google searching. I did that a lot for non-national park locations. So to try to figure out different state park parks to go to and things like that. I would just kind of, Google in whatever area I was in, interesting hikes in the area. And then from that, try to identify like cool state parks or different national preserves to try to go and visit. But for the most part, I mean, it was AllTrails that I utilized almost exclusively to choose hikes.
And you've been able to share some incredible destinations that you've been able to hit on this journey. And the one that caught my attention because it was outside of the lower 48, and I've said this a bunch of times on the podcast, but to this day, Banff National Park up in Alberta, Canada is one of my favorite places in the world. How did that national park come into your radar, and what made you decide to go up there?
Yeah, so it was kind of an interesting series of events that led me over there. In late July, I was in Seattle, Washington area, and I really wanted to visit Vancouver in British Columbia. And then the first weekend of August, I had a bachelor party set in place at Glacier National Park. So I had to get from the West Coast all the way over to Glacier National Park in Montana. And as I was looking at the map, I noticed that, if I'm in Vancouver, I could easily drive over to Banff and hit Banff and then drop down and go to Glacier National Park and still make it in time for my bachelor party. So that's exactly what I did. I visited Vancouver for a day or so, and then I immediately drove over to Banff because I had always wanted to see that. It's one of the most renowned and revered national parks, anywhere in the world. So I was happy to kind of go out of my way to visit it, and it was well worth it. Definitely a very stunning, gorgeous park. I was trying to see if I could squeeze in Jasper National Park at the same time. Unfortunately, they were experiencing the horrific wildfires at that time, so I wasn't able to make my way up to Jasper. But I'm almost happy that I wasn't able to go to Jasper at that time because Banff, I think, really takes 2 to 3 days to really experience. If I had had to split my time between the parks, I don't think I would have been able to enjoy it as much as I did. But being able to spend a couple days at Banff, being able to do a series of a few different hikes was just an incredible experience. So I would definitely recommend that for anyone who wants to travel out to the Canadian Rockies. They definitely live up to the hype for sure.
And Patrick, I want to, fast forward to the end of your journey. And I don't know if it was planned or how it came to be, but the last park on your list, the 51st park, ended up being Acadia National Park up in Maine. How did that kind of come to be? And what were your emotions when you finally, reached that 51st park?
Yeah, so it was definitely sort of an interesting route that I took over the course of 8 months. One of the challenges that I had is every month or so, I had some sort of obligation, whether it was going back home to visit family or I had a trip that I had to go on. I had to make certain decisions regarding the route that I took based upon meeting those, social obligations. So due to those events, the last area of the country that I had to visit was the Northeast. And it was actually perfect timing because I was able to visit in late September, early October, when the fall colors, especially in the northern part of New England, were at their peak. So it was really beautiful, stunning hiking that I was able to do. And because of that, Acadia was the last national park that I needed to go to all the national parks. So I went there and I want to say middle of October. The fall foliage was stunning and gorgeous. It was really just an amazing feeling to know that I was finally done. Had finally made it. Throughout this journey, there was always this sort of, I tend to be kind of a realistic, I call it realistic. Some others would call it pessimistic person, where I'm always thinking about, maybe what the worst thing that could happen, like, oh, I might hit a deer or my car might explode or whatever, what have you. So it was really a big weight off my shoulder to finally complete my journey and finally make it to the 51st National Park. It was just more relieving than anything that I finally made it. But yeah, definitely well worth it. A great way to, sort of end my journey. Acadia definitely is another park that lives up to the hype. Absolutely.
And, you mentioned experiencing challenges when it came to, you had 2 breakdowns that you had to get fixed, as well as, finding places to sleep and spend the night. What other challenges did you experience on your journey, whether they were physical, mental, or logistical?
I'll say the one that comes to mind immediately was schedule because of those, social obligations that I had. It was very important that I was on schedule and on time if I wanted to do all the things that I wanted to do. So making sure that each day I was doing what I had set out in my month schedule to do was very important. And if I got behind, having to go through and potentially cut things and so on and so forth, I was very fortunate. I was lucky when I had my breakdowns that I did. I was in like a major city, so I was able to get repaired and get back on the road relatively quickly. So fortunately, even though I had the two breakdowns, it didn't impede my schedule. I was able to complete everything that I wanted to do, even with those breakdowns. But that was definitely the most challenging thing, was making sure I was on schedule and I was, going to every place that I really wanted to. I've described it to friends that I don't really feel like I was vacationing. I feel like I was traveling. I had a pretty strict schedule that I had set for myself, and I had to make sure that I hit it if I wanted to do everything that I set out to do. But fortunately, I was able to do that. But that was definitely the biggest stressor for me.
Yeah, I've shared this in the past, but one of my last times going to Vegas, my plan was to visit Great Basin National Park, but I also wanted to hit Cathedral Gorge State Park on the way. And after being there for, 45 minutes and starting to explore the labyrinths that the state park had, I instantly knew that, there's no way I could do both. And I ultimately had to decide to continue to explore Cathedral Gorge and to give Great Basin its own opportunity, its own day or weekend to explore. Was there any park or place that kind of made you change your schedule just because you wanted to continue exploring it?
Yeah, the one that comes to mind immediately was Olympic National Park. I spent, 2 days there, which I'd really only allocated one day, which I realized was not nearly enough time to be able to truly experience the park. And even with 2 days, I really feel like I've only scratched the surface of that park. I feel like with the majority of the other parks that I've traveled to, even if I haven't experienced everything in the park, I experienced the major highlights, so to speak. But Olympic National Park is a park that I really feel like there's still a lot more to do in the park and a lot more that I'd like to see. So that's one that I would really, hopefully in the future, I can have more time to really explore that in more detail and to be able to truly experience the park.
Yeah, I barely got a chance to visit Olympic National Park last summer, and similar to you, just scratched the surface. Definitely want to go back and explore more, especially the Pacific Ocean side of the park. I hear the beaches are just incredible over on that side. You were able to share your list that you created from your journey, and I'm wondering if you could share your top 5 national parks as well as maybe the bottom 5.
Yeah, I would say my top 5 national parks. Number one has to be Yosemite. Very generic pick, but it's gorgeous enough to justify it. I also really like Grand Teton. That was one that I didn't really expect to rate as high as I did, but something about the contrast between the Mormon Row and the mountains in the background. It's very cowboy-esque, and I definitely fell in love with the landscapes there. I would also say probably for myself, I really enjoyed Capitol Reef. That was probably my favorite national park in Utah. Just really stunning there. And then I would say for overall experience, Dry Tortugas has to kind of round out the top 5 for me. Now, this is coming from someone who, really hasn't explored as much internationally. So someone who's had an opportunity to really travel around the Caribbean, they might think otherwise. But for someone like myself, Dry Tortugas was unlike anything else I'd ever experienced and was a very unique national park, to say the least. So I would say that rounds out my top 5. In terms of parks that I like the least, there's a few that come to mind. I unfortunately have to rate all 3 of the cave parks in my bottom 5. I'm just not much of a cave person. I, enjoyed them for what they are. I appreciate that, protected ecosystems, but it's just not something that I personally enjoy. So that would probably be in the first 3 slots of my bottom 5. Probably I regretfully have to add Gateway Arch in there as well. I will say I personally love the Gateway Arch. I think it's a stunning piece of architecture, but it's definitely not a national park. And if it is, it's not a very good one. So I would probably put that at the 4. And then I would say for myself, maybe Petrified Forest. Not that there was anything necessarily bad about it. It just wasn't necessarily the most interesting park. So I would probably put that in 5.
And I got to ask, because, you're almost there with completing all 4 national parks. Is there a goal to complete the national park circuit here in the next couple of years?
There definitely is. The exact timing of that is sort of TBD. One of the things I will say, my next big travel goal, or the thing that I really want to do next, is go to Europe. I've never had an opportunity to travel to Europe, so I would love to kind of do a similar extended road trip like I did here in the States, but do it over in Europe. So do a backpacking for, 6 to 7 months, that sort of thing, and really try to experience as much of the continent as I reasonably can. So that's sort of the priority for me now. But I will say, once I go to Europe, then definitely after that, the next goal would be to try to round out and complete all 63 national parks. Alaska is probably going to take quite a while. I didn't realize until here recently that a lot of the national parks in Alaska, you can't drive to them. You either have to take a ferry or a small plane to visit the park. So when I was doing sort of just some rough math as to, how much this would cost, so to speak, it definitely looks like it could be north of, $5,000 just for traveling to each of the national parks, let alone like hotel rooms and things like that. So that is one that I think is going to take a little bit to try to, knock out all those parks up in Alaska. But certainly after I go to Europe, that is the next goal. But yeah, hopefully I can complete all the national parks. I'll give myself a decade to try to complete all 63.
If someone is listening, is inspired by the journey that you're able to share with us and wants to take a similar adventure, what advice would you give them about planning, packing, or navigating some of these long road trips?
For myself, the biggest piece of advice that I would probably give is to make sure you have a means of communicating with the outside world in the absence of, cell phone reception. That was one thing that, looking back on, I really wish I had purchased like a satellite phone or some other means of communication. So that way, if I got hurt along a trail or had broken a bone or what have you, I would have an ability to get help and call for help. I didn't do that on my journey. And I think in retrospect, that wasn't the smartest decision. So I would definitely recommend, especially if you're a solo hiker, make sure you have a means of communicating with the outside world, especially if you are in a remote national park in the mountains somewhere. And then outside of that, I would really just recommend taking that leap of faith. And also, as you're traveling, understand when to take the L, so to speak. And what I mean by that is, there were certain instances along my journey where there was a hike that I really wanted to do, but either the weather wasn't very good or conditions on the trail weren't very good for whatever reason. And it was really recommended that you don't do the hike on that day. But, I'm the kind of person that once I get an idea in my head, I'm kind of stubborn about it and I really want to complete it. But that got me in trouble a couple times where when I was on the hike or doing whatever, the weather was really poor and it made it just a very miserable experience. Or in the case of certain areas like Death Valley, a dangerous experience due to just how hot it was at the time when I went to the park. So I definitely understand for people that are traveling to these national parks, this might be the first time or the only time that they're able to experience this park. And they want to make sure they experience as much of it as they can because they don't know when they're going to come back to the park. But, there comes a certain point where going on a trail or doing a hike is just not worth risking your life over. So I would definitely recommend people that sometimes it's just not worth the experience. It's not worth putting your life at risk to do a hike or experience some sort of area of the park. So definitely kind of keep that in mind and prioritize your safety above all else.
Yeah, solid tips, Patrick. And looking forward to continue seeing the posts that you make on the various subreddits that kind of share a little bit more about your experience and some of the beautiful sights and sounds that you were able to see. These last few questions, Patrick, are questions we like to ask all the guests on the podcast. The first one is about a regular routine. For some of us, we have a regular summit routine or end of the hike routine. It could be packing your favorite snack or drink, a moment of zen, or maybe the favorite meal afterwards. Was there a regular customer routine that you would do when you would reach your destination or when you would make it back out?
Yeah, I would say for myself, it wasn't necessarily routine, but, when I would complete a really arduous hike or one that was really taxing, sometimes the chicken, rice, and beans meal that I had for myself didn't look very appealing. So I would like to go out to like a restaurant and celebrate. There were two usual locations that I would usually go. The first is Texas Roadhouse. I would get the steak and chicken critters meal, which is an incredible combo if you've never experienced that. And then the other, in true Gen Z fashion, I would go to Chili's and get a triple dipper, which if you've never had a triple dipper, I definitely recommend that you experience that. But those were sort of the two like celebratory meals that I would have after a particularly difficult hike.
I'm going to have to try both of those. We just got a Texas Roadhouse in the city that I live. I haven't had a chance to visit it, so definitely going to keep that menu item on a list so I can try it out when I do get a chance to visit it. Now, this next question, Patrick, is about your pack list. And this could be either a pack list for your car or for your hikes. But was there a luxury item that you tended to pack that fell outside of the essentials, whether it was for your car or for hikes?
I would say for hiking, I would usually always pack my headphones because there were certain instances where, I would like to play music, maybe once I reached the summit or, if I was stopped along the trail or what have you. So a pair of headphones was probably my big luxury item when I was hiking. When I wasn't hiking just for the car, I would regularly bring my laptop along with me. That way I could, if I needed to do like any work, I could hop on either a McDonald's Wi-Fi or just create my own hotspot and do work from there. So for my car, probably my laptop that I brought along with me. And then hiking, it would definitely be my headphones.
And then you kind of touched base on this, but we're at the beginning of 2025. Is there any hiking or travel goals that you have set in place for the rest of this year?
No, I don't think Europe is going to happen this year. I kind of have to work on sort of, reestablishing my career, so to speak. But this year, one of the things that I'm interested in, my alma mater is Purdue University down in Indiana, and they're playing Washington in Washington this year. And so me and my friends are talking about potentially traveling out there to watch the game because we have a few friends that live out there. So it'd be a nice reunion of sorts. But one of the trails that I really want to hike that I didn't have an opportunity to do during my journey is Cascade Pass in North Cascades National Park. So I would love to see if I could sort of package that in with that trip. I need to do more research because the game is in November. So I don't know if that'll be too late into the season to really do any sort of serious hiking. So I'll have to kind of investigate that. But that's one that I'm really hoping I can knock out here within the next year or so. Cascade Pass.
I definitely highly recommend it, Patrick. It is something else. This last bit of the podcast, Patrick, are the this or that questions. I'm going to ask you 10 hiking related topics, and you just choose which one you prefer out of the two. You're more than welcome to say both or neither. But the first one is, when it comes to trail snacks, do you prefer sweet or savory?
Both are excellent, but I have a sweet tooth, so I'm partial to sweet.
And then, would you prefer waterfalls or summits?
I'm definitely more of a summit guy, although a beautiful waterfall is fantastic, but I'm definitely on Team Summit.
And then when it comes to trail systems, would you prefer a trail that had switchbacks, or would you rather go straight up?
My experience hiking in the Northeast made me very grateful for switchbacks, so I'll go with switchbacks.
And then the most controversial one, trek poles or freehand?
I try so hard to use trek poles, but I just can't do it. I have to do freehand.
And then this next one's about your footwear. Do you use trail runners or traditional hiking boots?
I'm definitely more of a traditional hiking boots guy, for sure.
And then here's another trail system question. Do you prefer a loop trail or an out and back trail?
I definitely like the loop. I like being able to experience new things along the entire hike.
You had a year of solo adventures, so I'm curious about this response, but group hikes or solo adventures?
I love both for different reasons, but I definitely am probably partial to a solo hike.
And then these next two are the hardest ones, and you probably had experienced some amazing ones when it comes to these two. But do you prefer sunset hikes or sunrise hikes?
I am very much not a morning person, so by virtue of that, I got to go sunset all the way.
And then spring wildflowers or fall colors?
My experience in October in the Northeast definitely made me love a nice fall hike, so fall foliage for sure.
And then the last one, would you prefer to do a steep climb or long distance?
I definitely like just getting it over with, so I'm partial to a steep climb.
Awesome, Patrick. That was it for the this or that questions. If folks want to follow along in your journey, as well as look back at your cross-country trip, where are some of the places they can find you either on social media or elsewhere on the web?
Yeah, so I've been doing some posts here on Reddit just to sort of highlight my journey and highlight some of the places that I've been. If you want to follow along with that, my username is one man, one Prius. So you can, follow me there and sort of look through my post history. And, if you want to learn more about my journey and, places that I went, you can follow along there. I also have an Instagram, Pat Smith 1126, if anyone's curious or wants to follow me. I haven't posted anything in like 5 or 6 years, but yeah, either one man, one Prius on Reddit if you want to learn more information about my journey, or if you just want to follow me on Instagram, Pat Smith 1126.
Awesome. And we'll be sure to link both of those in the episode show notes so people can follow along. Patrick, it has been a blast having you on the podcast and hearing about your experience, and looking forward to what 2025 has to offer for you. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your day and coming on the podcast.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate being able to chat with you today. I had a blast.
And that brings us to the end of this episode alongside Patrick. We extend a heartfelt thanks to him for coming on the podcast. To see and learn more about Patrick's incredible journey, follow him on Reddit, username one man, one Prius. Also, don't forget to check out the episode show notes to learn more. We have an incredible lineup of episodes planned throughout the winter months, and we can't wait to share them with you. New episodes will be dropping every Monday with occasional bonus episodes on Friday. To ensure you never miss out on these thrilling tales, remember to hit the like and subscribe button. Your support means the world to us. Don't forget to check out our vibrant community on Instagram at Hikes and Mics. We'll be sharing episode visuals, my own personal hiking content, and so much more. Let's stay connected and continue to inspire each other on this remarkable journey. As we bid farewell, remember to tread those happy trails, embrace the great outdoors, and keep the spirit of adventure alive. Until next time, my fellow explorers, happy hiking. This episode's music was created by Ketsa. Follow him on Instagram at Ketsa Music. This episode is brought to you by Ursa Minor Outfitters. Folks, I'm absolutely in love with my loon mug. It's handmade, it's an absolute piece of art. Whether it's at the office or at the house, people keep asking to check it out. If you're not a loon fan, they also have other beautiful mugs for wildlife fans of moose, bears, and eagles. They specialize in products highlighting the outdoors and local pride through quality design by local artists. They've even started expanding into items beyond mugs, like apparel, dog accessories, and soon candles and more. They also try to partner and highlight other small businesses, and in some cases, forego profits in lieu of charitable giving to help their community, such as the dog rescue. So check them out, UrsaMinorOutfitters.com, and enter promo code HikesMikes10 at checkout to receive 10% off your order. And for our four-legged hiking partners, they also have a portable silicone dog bowl and also a sweet over-the-collar dog bandana. Go check them out, UrsaMinorOutfitters.com, and don't forget to enter promo code HikesMikes10 at checkout to receive 10% off your order.